I finally made a model of Donnington Castle for the layout. Keep watching to find out how I did it. Hi everyone, I'm Martin and welcome to Donnington Castle. And over the course of the channel, I've been very conscious of something that's been quite conspicuous by its absence, and that is a model of the castle after which the layout is named. So I've come here today on a very bright and breezy day to take a look around and have a look to get enough information to figure out just how difficult a job this is going to be. Now, I originally was going to make the model at the end of the layout just because the level of skill needed to create something like this I thought was far in advance of my own capabilities. But as the years, I guess now, have gone on, that confidence has grown, and now, particularly with things like AI generation, I'm very interested to see whether I can create a reproduction of this castle. So for those of you who aren't aware, Donnington Castle is just north of Newbury in Berkshire here in the UK. It looks out over the Kennet Valley and over Newbury itself. And from here you get a good sense of some of the railways in the area, which I'm taking inspiration for on the layout. But we'll come back and look at those another day, as today's focus is going to be on the castle right here. The castle was originally built in 1386, but not really as a defensive position, more as a statement home for the then owner. The most traumatic period of the castle's history came during the Civil War, where an 18-month siege was laid to the castle, and a lot of it was destroyed during the siege and then subsequently afterwards when Parliament ordered it pulled down. And all that remains is this very iconic gatehouse. So just prior to the Civil War, the fortifications around the castle were improved because this was never built to withstand cannon fire. As you can see from the flint construction, this wasn't made of solid stone, and those embankments are going to be a really nice, interesting feature to model. But also the castle itself is going to be quite a challenge given the mixed materials that we can see from its construction, and also in its current state with some of the repair work you can see. For example, the brick infill is not obviously original, but something that I'd like to capture in the model itself. So when it comes to building the model itself, I think we have three real choices. One is to totally scratch build, and I imagine that's going to involve wood, plasticard, and probably some modelling clay. I don't think laser cutting is really an option for this building because it's not really very geometrically shaped in any way. 3D printing is certainly an option. However, we're going to need to get a model in order to be able to 3D print that. But given some of the advances in technology in recent years, maybe there are some shortcuts we could take in this process. So let's have a look around, see what we can find, and just get a handle on whether there are some cheat modes we can activate to build this castle, or whether we're going to really have to scratch build this thing. Okay, let's head back to the layout and let's get stuck in. And the castle will sit here in the back right-hand corner of the layout. This is the back corner of the layout where I've always intended the castle to sit. Now, a few things to note are that our tunnel exits here, and as you can see, I still have a little bit of landscaping when this tunnel section's finished in here, just to bed this portal in. That means that that land will change slightly against the back scene there. This area over the back will need building up to be able to fit the castle onto it. I've not done that yet because I was waiting to see how big the castle was going to be before doing that. I think once I've got a rough mock-up of the castle in the right size, then I will then start work on that. The intention is to try and replicate some of the sense of the defensive positions of the real Donnington Castle, but not do a faithful reproduction. I also want to have a path leading up to the front of the castle the way that happens in reality, and then we'll see how far down here we can go in terms of meeting that up with the station area off to the left hand side. There's the possibility of popping something like a substation in here. Whether that fits in here or over the back, I'm not sure yet. But what I will do is I'll work on building that landscape up over the back there once we've got the castle done. So hopefully that gives you a sense of where the castle's going to go. I think what we need to do now is try and see how complicated building the castle itself is going to be. So let's take a look at an online tool, and this is Meshy AI. Someone at the club very kindly put me in the direction of this tool. The great thing is that it's generative AI that can create 3D models for you, and you can do that from a text description, or from our case here, probably most interestingly, you can use an image and it will create then a 3D model of that image. Now, Meshy is constantly being worked on and enhanced. The free version at the moment enables you to upload a single photo. However, if you pay for one of the levels of service in here, you can upload multiple photos, allowing a really good 3D model to be created with information from different perspectives. Now, as you can imagine, only having a single photo means that the tool doesn't know what's behind that, and will therefore have to make assumptions and hallucinate, if you want a better term, to come up with what goes around the back of it. So it may well be that paying for a Meshy subscription would solve our problem here, but in the absence of that, let's just see what it creates for us. So we've uploaded an image, and from a free account we get a series of coins that we can use to create things, and that's generating away now. It obviously does some interpretation of the picture, so this thinks this is an ancient fortress tower, which to some extent is true, I guess. So that's going to come up with a model for us, and you can see we'll get several versions. You can see that the first one has popped out, which from the front looks pretty good, but around the back again you can see that hallucination because it just doesn't know what's there, which is, I think, fair enough. And what we'll get now is we'll start getting some other options popping up, and from the perspective of what's visible in that photo, it can create a very, very good 3D model for you. Now sometimes those models will not be printable because they're not contiguous, or there are additional bits tacked onto them, so the quality can be variable at times. But over the months that I've been looking at this tool, I've seen it come on huge leaps, and I think in the future a lot of people are going to be using this as a way of creating models, particularly for 3D printing. If you want to, you can create a texture file to go on the outside of it. That's more useful if we're creating 3D models for use online rather than in physical form. We don't need that texture. So we can then download, and that gives us our output file, which we can then import into a slicing tool and see what kind of model it's created for us. So let's do that now. So my go-to slicer for 3D printing is Cura. It's free and easy to download. And what I've done here is I've just taken that model straight out of Meshy that we downloaded, imported it in here, and used my standard print profile to slice that. And we can see that it's going to take a rather impressive 2 days and 11 hours to print that. But let's not worry too much about that for now. But if we look at how that print is going to go, we can see that there are internal areas within this. There's a lot of support, and the support's touching the inside of the model as well, which isn't great. There are ways that we can probably fix that. But the key thing here is that this is not really the model that we want, because it doesn't fully replicate the back of Donnington Castle. So whilst it is a good attempt, and in the future I think it's a tool that I'm going to be using a lot, for this application let's see if there's an easier way. So let's just do a search for Donnington Castle 3D model, And as we can see, there are some hits, and I'm on Sketchfab here, and we can see that there are 3 examples of it, but that's not necessarily helpful. So if we start with this one, this is a very nice 3D model, but this is not downloadable, unfortunately. So we can look at it online. It's great as a reference source, but we can't use the model itself, and also it's not fully contiguous. If you've ever wondered, an interesting thing to look at here is how are these models made. And if we go to the wireframe and I zoom in, you will see that these 3D models are effectively a series of triangles that are all put together to create the structure of the model itself, and then over the top is then effectively an image file. And those 2 things together, when viewed out online, give a very good sense of texture to it. Now, if we want to create this ourselves, then we are going to have to turn a 3D model into something physical, and the easiest way of doing that is to 3D print it. If we do that, we have to remember that the model we're going to get, assuming we can get one of these, is not going to include the surface texture, because that's been added on with an image. So that will be a challenge later on in the process. But if we have a look here, we will see that this model here, it's just taking its time to load. There we go. It's a full model of the castle, which is quite cool. But we are able to download an STL file and texture files from it. And the good thing is, it's pretty contiguous. So there's a chance we're going to be able to 3D print this. So let's download that model, put that into a slicing tool, assuming we're going to 3D print it, and just see what we've got to be getting on with. So let's download and go from that. Okay, let's import our model into Cura and see what we get. It's quite a big model, so the loading takes a little bit of time, but you can see there we've got a very tiny version of the model, so we'll need to do some work on that. So first thing we're going to do is increase the size, so we'll make that up to 1000% just so you can see what we're working on here. Let's put that in prepare mode, and you'll see we get an error message saying that it isn't a contiguous model for whatever reason, and therefore Cura's warning us that it's not likely to print properly. But we will deal with some of that as we go along. So for whatever reason this isn't orientated correctly, so we need to do a bit of rotation, drop that down onto the build plane, and you will then notice that not only do we have the tower, but we have the grounds around it as well. And in terms of printing, I don't need that or want that really. But we need to really understand how good this model is for printing and whether it's even going to be possible. So what we're going to need to do is create a little proof of concept that we can print out and just have a look at to see what that looks like. So something that's not the correct scale to start with. Now the simplest way of getting rid of all of those extra areas is just drop it through the base plane of the slicer, and that way only the bit above will get factored into the slicing. Now that's obviously cut off our door there, but that will give us a model that we can create a test print of just to see what that's going to come out and look like. When it comes, if we do decide we're going to use this model, we will need to find other ways of then removing the rest of that landscape to make life a bit easier for us when it comes to printing.
So I'm just getting a good scale now and just seeing how far I can drop that down. Then we can slice that and just see what we're looking at time-wise. So as it stands, that's going to take 6 hours and 33 minutes, and that's a bit long for proof of concept. But if I go to preview mode, you can see how this will print. You can see the blue areas that are the supports that are needed to deal with some of the overhangs. But in terms of a model, it looks pretty good. We're not getting any errors out, and when we move up through the layers, we can see that the print looks like it should work quite well, which is all good. Right, let's do a test print and see what that comes out like. This is our small test print. It's just come off the printer. You can see where it's been squished into the plane of the slicer because the bottom of the door is cut off. But it gives us a good impression of the quality of the model and particularly how easily it's going to print. And this looks good to me. So I'd be very confident scaling this up to the right size and then giving that a full print. But the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to tidy up the model a little bit because we obviously can't use this technique and lose half the door. So let's look at that bit next. Now, to get rid of the bits of our model that we don't need, I'm going to use a tool called Blender. Now, Blender is not a tool I'd recommend using first off if you're trying to get into 3D modelling. I would highly recommend more of a CAD tool like Tinkercad if you want to do that. Blender is used for 3D modelling, but also not just for physical modelling, but for creating virtual landscapes and even doing animation and all sorts of bits and pieces like that. So it is incredibly complex. So I can't give you a full tutorial of this. It can be software that's worth investing the time in learning about. But yeah, I wouldn't say start out with this as your kind of first go. Although this process I'm going to undertake here is quite simple, doesn't use many of the functions of Blender. What I'm effectively going to do is try and delete the floor. So what we'll do first of all is go into edit mode in Blender. And in edit mode, you then see that wireframe that I highlighted when we were looking for models. Effectively, a series of lines, vertices, and faces. Without going into all the details, we can highlight those vertices or faces or using different tools and effectively use that as a way of deleting them out of the model. So there may be more elegant solutions to this, but for me, I'm just going to highlight and delete. And depending on which one of them you pick will depend on what gets deleted each time, so it can be a little bit of a time-consuming process. But I will go through that and do that. For the areas away from the castle itself, that's quite easy. You can just select large areas. When you get a little bit closer, you have to zoom in and do things a little bit kind of more refined. So let's skip ahead to where I've deleted a lot of that. And you'll see now that we're getting closer. I'm working up to the edges and then just going around and collecting all the kind of the stray points. So we've got a much cleaner model. So that's the first step in this process. Now, what you might remember from Cura is that we don't have a contiguous model, i.e. the bottom of this model doesn't have a base on it. So that means that unless we want to sink this down into our build plane, we're going to get errors from the slicer, and it may or may not even be able to produce a slice model to print. So the easiest way of fixing that is going to be to flip this thing over and pop a base onto the model itself. Now what we're going to do for that is we can use a function in Blender So to do that, firstly we just need to clean up any parts of the model that are loose, and then we can then use so we can see if there's anything that's not manifold, and that will highlight the bottom, I guess, kind of skirt of the model, and then we can add a face to that to make the model contiguous. Now it's not the most elegant face, but Blender does that automatically for us, and now if we import this model into our slicer, it will see it as a complete contiguous model, which is what we need. This is going to sit on the landscape on the layout, and therefore we can embed this into the ground and hide the kind of the rough edges around the model. So I am happy with where we are here now. So let's save this and go back into Cura and import it in there ready for slicing. Okay, and here we are. What I've done is I've scaled this up. In terms of the dimensions, there is no information that I can find online about the size of the existing gate tower, so I've had to make some estimates, obviously basing this on 4mm to the foot, and so this is what I think is right at that scale. And you'll see we're being told it's going to take 23 hours and 40 minutes to print this, so we probably want to be fairly sure that this is going to be okay. What I've done is I've dropped the infill density on this right down to 10%. That should give us enough strength, but that'll also make it a little bit lighter and not use as much filament up as well. So let's also look at the preview of how this is going to print, because you'll notice there's a large gap underneath the model at the moment, and on this you can see the red is our outer layers, and our light blue is our support material, which will all come off at the end. But you've noticed that right underneath the model there's a huge chunk of support. I could print this at an angle to remove that, but then it might look a little bit odd because our layer lines won't be horizontal across the model, they'll be at an angle, and that might just look a little bit odd. So I'm going to give this a go and deal with that support at the end. But as you can see, as I move up through the layers there, we've got a good model. So let's get this onto the 3D printer, and I'll come back after 23 hours and 40 minutes. Right, Donnington Castle has finished printing. So that took about 23 hours. Now, a few observations just on the print while we're here. You can see there's plenty of stringing going on. That can all be cleaned off, so that's not a big issue. This is an all-metal hot end on this 3D printer. I swapped it out for them. And I've never been able to really dial down the extraction settings to get rid of that. You'll see lots of bits of stringing. A lot of this is to do with, you see here, this is all support material. So that's not a huge concern either, we'll get rid of all of that. Layer lines, you can just about see them, so we'll need to do something about that. Probably a bit of wet and dry just to take the edge off those, but otherwise they're not too bad, I don't think. And if you backlight it, it's a little bit translucent because we've only got 3 lines of filament around the edge, and then only 10% fill. So if I pick this up, if it's going to come, no, I'm going to take that off because that's stuck quite well. But that translucency won't matter at all because we're going to paint it anyway. You can see where the support material is under the back, because the back is obviously higher up than the front, so we need to remove all that. So I'll take that out of here, clean it up. I don't think it's that interesting watching that process, and we'll see where we get to. I've done a bit of tidying up here. I've not taken it off its base. So this is with a 00 figure in the entrance, and to me the castle looks a little small, but I don't think that's necessarily such a bad thing, because what I'll probably want to do on the layout
is keep any figures further from it, and use it slightly under scale in order to give it a sense of it being slightly further away, which I think will work up on that hill. But let me put it over on the layout in that position, and I'll see whether that's the case. If it's not going to work, then we'll have to print again a little bit bigger. But I'm pretty confident with this, but we'll see. And there we have it in this corner. I don't think it's high enough, and therefore I think it's going to need to go further back into that corner. I think it really needs to come up so that you get this sense of this looking down over the layout. It's not quite there yet. I think it needs to be up at least level with this track here, and maybe a little bit higher. But size-wise, I think that's going to be okay. Now, one of the challenges here is going to be painting it and getting the right texture, because you'll have seen from the photographs we have a mixture of flint and brick making up the walls. So we'll have to find a way of doing that. So this might be an experimental first version anyway. If I have to print it again, or I have to make another version, I might go a bit bigger. But I think this is close enough, or will look good enough to at least be painted, and for us to see how that looks. You might not be able to tell much difference on camera, but I've given this a quick rub down with some very fine wet and dry. There aren't too many layer lines on it, and I think once a coat of primer's gone over the top, you won't be able to see much of that anyway. Just one thing to note, if you are printing with supports on a big model like this, and particularly on a large area underneath, you need to be aware that you're not going to be able to remove a lot of those. There's always a trade-off between stability while printing and the ability then to snap off and remove supports. That can all be tweaked in the slicer, but if you go too far, then you'll find that the model kind of moves around while it's printing, and you won't get a good quality print. In this case, it doesn't really matter, because this is going to go flat down onto the landscape, so we're not going to see any of that. But I've just taken the worst of it off. Okay. As far as this video is concerned, what I will do is I will get this primed, and I will use the airbrush to do that. So I'll come back and do that in a second, and you'll see.
As you can see, I'm all set up here in the paint booth for the airbrush. I'm not going to be able to talk while I'm doing this because there'll be lots of extraction going. I'll have a mask on. So just to give you a quick overview of what I'm about to do. On smaller models, I don't tend to use the airbrush for priming, but for a big model like this, I'm going to use this Vallejo Surface Primer Grey. I'll get that into the airbrush. That's quite well thinned already, so I won't need too much thinner. I'll then use the turntable to rotate this around and get a nice even coating of that primer on it, and that will give us at least, hopefully, something that looks a little bit like a castle. So all the noise is about to start. I will see you on the other side. So if you watched carefully, you might have spotted a few things that's thrown up. First is I thinned the paint too much when I started, so I ended up just going with the neat primer and not putting it through the sieve. Second one is that I didn't clean my airbrush very well last time because there was a slight blockage in that. And then the third one is that I didn't do a very good job cleaning the model up, as you can see from lots of bits of stringing, but also the layer lines have come through. They're a bit more prominent around this side. Some of these are features and some of these are from the printing. These look like very minor layer shifts, which I sometimes get a problem with this printer. But otherwise, that's not a bad first step. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back over this and do another set of cleaning once that paint's dried. And then I'm going to have a look at how much of these layer lines I want to try and get out and how much I think I can hide behind more layers of paint and any covering that I'm going to put on this to get the desired final effect. You can probably also see where the paint is thin in some areas. I'll go back over that again once I've done a bit of tidying up, because I'll inevitably reveal some yellow when I do a little bit more cleaning up.
So I've come down the side of the layout to see if this is a good enough working space, and we'll just have to do a couple of things just to note. You'll see that there's a gap in the baseboard here. This is really the only place that needs filling other than the big area over at the front of the layout, which we know about. So at some point I'll need to get that filled in. Also see that these tracks for the southern line are not curving round enough, so they will need lifting slightly. They're only stuck down with copy decks, and reshaping as those get run up there. But this corner will need building up with the blocks of insulation foam that are in a bag at my feet. They're all offcuts, and we want to take the level up. This won't come across very well from this angle. This is the level of the track here. If we come up, say, about here, and then go across to kind of about here is where we want to build that layer up. So then with our plaster bandage and sculptor mould on top, that's going to bring the castle sitting into this space here, probably more rightly in this corner here. So let me crack on with that, and I'll come back and show you when I made some progress. I've now played my usual 3D Tetris and got a very basic landscape together. It is very rough and ready, and that's because the plaster bandage and the sculptor mould will cover all of the issues that we have right now. So the key things for me here are, does the castle have an imposing position over the landscape, the way that we want it to be? And if I come down to the level of the tracks here, you can see that indeed that is commanding quite a nice view over that. The vertical cliff faces will all get smoothed out a bit. I'll build that up with sculptor mould, so we don't need to worry too much about that. We've got a path cut in here. We've also got the opportunity to have the castle up on a higher level and then build some of the defences at a slightly lower level, the way that there is at the real castle as well. So I'm happy with how that's looking. At least happy enough to cover that over with some plaster bandage, and then I will also add a bit of sculptor mould just to try and get that contour of the landscape, and I will come back and show you that when it's done. That is the plaster bandage done. Now let's move on to some homemade sculptor mould. And we now have sculptor mould in place and a first coat of paint. So this is just Hobbycraft cheap brown kids paint over the top of my homemade sculptor mould, and hopefully you can see that these slopes have been leveled out a little bit, so covering this in grass like the actual castle on the hill it sits on, I think will be absolutely fine. I have carved, and it might not come across very well, a path into the sculptor mould. It's not quite a hollow way, but it's certainly a very worn path. We'll be able to use that to bring that through as we do the landscaping around there. The castle's not bedded in. I need to paint that first before we do that. And then there are a few bits around the back there to touch up. I need to put the extra bit of back scene in there and then do a little bit of tidying. Then need to think about what decoration we're going to put on here. There's not much around the real castle, but I think adding a little bit of interest in terms of figures and maybe a few little objects might well bring that to life a little bit more. Tracks down the front, I'm starting to think about moving those and getting those laid so we can be absolutely sure that that corner is going to work, and then the tunnel needs finishing off and that tunnel portal needs doing. So that's all in progress. And I think that's a really nice place to end things on this video. So just recapping on what we've done.
We've been able to find a 3D model online and build up a landscape to get what is already starting to look like a very passable Donnington Castle in place. It's been really good to be able to do this, because I think leaving the castle to the end, I think, would have been a little bit disappointing to have a layout called Donnington Castle Model Railway and no sign of a castle anywhere. So it's been nice to be able to make such progress, and finding that 3D model online, I think, has ended up with a model that is far superior to anything that I've been able to scratch build, given the complexity of that structure and the fact that it is quite a distinctive looking building. But that doesn't mean to say that all the difficult bits of the project are behind us. The decoration of the castle itself, I think, is going to be a real challenge. I could just paint it grey and make it look like a generic stone castle, but I think those flint walls and the brick infill where some of the damage has been caused to the castle over the years, I think, are really kind of key features of it. And therefore being able to replicate some of that, I think, is really important. That's a process that I'm going to have to go and experiment and try a few techniques on. So it's going to take me a little while to get the final castle built. The landscape, I think, is relatively straightforward. So we'll be able to move forwards with that. But before I do that, I want to lay those southern lines down the bottom and make sure that everything fits from a railway perspective. So plenty of work to do, and hopefully we'll be able to revisit this subject in the near future in order to show you the kind of final progress on that. So I hope you enjoyed seeing the progress we've made so far. Thank you very much for watching, and please do, if you're not already a subscriber, please do think about subscribing so that when the next parts of this video and all future videos come out, then you can be notified of that. But I will hope to see you all on another video again very soon. Bye for now.